Do you want to do the roll call?
Sure. Commissioner Graham, absent. Commissioner Hutton. Here. Commissioner Skinner, absent. Commissioner Needham,
Here.
Councilmember Smith, absent. Commissioner Slavic, absent. Commissioner Appel, absent. Commissioner Gabe Randall. Here. Councilmember Bannister. Here. Commissioner Callawart. Here. Chair Brown.
Here.
Commissioner Overpeck.
Here.
And Commissioner Mursky, absent. You have a quorum.
Okay. So I think I'd like to welcome Professor Jonathan Overpeck to the Environmental Commission. I think this is the first time you've been here. So
Yes.
would you like to say anything or introduce yourself to the group?
I hadn't prepared anything, but I'm really happy to be here. And I apologize that life's challenges kept me from coming earlier. I'm a professor and dean at the University of Michigan, School for Environment and Sustainability. And I'm really eager. I'm a citizen, obviously, of the Ann Arbor. And I'm really looking forward to working with everybody, both on general Ann Arbor environmental issues, but also in hopefully in ways that we can get better coordination between the university and the city. That's one of my goals. I can't promise any magic wand, though I'm not that high up in the chain of command, but eager to help wherever I can. Thank
Okay.
you.
Well, welcome.
And I'm a climate scientist, so I have a lot of expertise there, too.
Okay. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes from the August 22nd meeting. Is there any discussion? No? All right, is there a motion to approve them? Okay, all in favor say aye.
All right.
Okay, the motion passes unanimously. So, okay, the next item is public commentary. Does anybody wish to?
Approval of minutes, if you don't mind.
Oh,
The approval of minutes.
yeah. So, now, in terms of approval of minutes, the minutes from the, I guess we already did the minutes, I think. So I think we're doing the agenda now.
I think you did the agenda, now it's minutes.
Okay, well, all right. So
It's all good.
is there a motion to, any discussion about the agenda? Any suggested changes? No. So is there a motion to approve the agenda for the minutes? Okay, second? Bob Needham, seconds. All approve the agenda of the August, or the minutes?
Aye.
Aye? Aye, okay. The minutes are approved. So now's the time for public commentary. Is there anybody who wishes to come forward? Please come up and state your name.
My name is Robin Tuck, and I'm here to ask you to put a new climate emergency resolution with an accelerated timeline on the October 24th meeting agenda. Why should we declare a state of climate emergency? Is it just a meaningless resolution that has no teeth? Aren't we making plans and budgets to reach net zero carbon as soon as possible? What's the point? This is about how we as humans respond to threats, by either entering emergency mode or by remaining in neutral mode, and it's highly contagious. Imagine the fire alarm goes off in the office building. How seriously should you take it? How do you know if it's a drill or a real fire? Those questions will be answered by the actions and communications of the people around you, particularly the people who are designated as leaders. If they're chatting and taking their time exiting the building, you will assume this is a drill. If people are moving with haste, faces stern and focused, communicating urgency and gravity, you will assume that there's real danger and exit as quickly as possible. To evaluate whether we are currently in a climate crisis, the public will look to each other, and particularly to leaders. Are they calling it an emergency? Does the tone of their writing and statements convey alarm and a passionate desire for massive action to avert immediate crisis? Are they themselves in emergency mode? If the answer to these questions is no, the individual will conclude that there must not be an emergency, or that emergency action is hopeless because leaders are apparently unwilling to coordinate emergency action. This suggests that those who communicate with euphemism and advocate carbon gradualism are actually preventing the public from understanding that we are in a climate emergency. We need to join the thousands of local governments in 19 countries that have declared a climate emergency. So please add it to the agenda for October 24th. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody else?
Ken Garber, 2387 Hilldale. Like Robin, I'm with the local grassroots group Climate Mobilization. I'm supposed to be at a family reunion, but this was too important. As Greta Thunberg pointed out last week at the UN, according to the IPCC, we have a remaining global carbon budget of about 350 gigatons CO2. That's for a 67% chance of keeping global warming at 1.5 degrees centigrade, the IPCC's threshold for unacceptable climate risks and irreversible feedback loops. That budget will be exhausted in less than 9 years at current emissions. So the industrialized world needs to reduce emissions by 15 to 20% a year, starting now. That will give underdeveloped nations more time to reach net zero. This global equity principle is central to the Paris Agreement. My generation, the baby boomers, has completely failed Greta Thunberg and Robin, who just spoke. We've stolen their future. I know we're not supposed to talk about intergenerational responsibility and global equity because that turns people off. But I'm tired of speaking in half-truths. Tonight we're asking you to pass a climate emergency resolution with a net zero citywide target of December 31st, 2025. Now, to your credit, you passed a climate emergency resolution last December with a 2040 target. Thank you. That was never taken up by City Council. Because of the new IPCC assessment and global reality, we've set this new, far more aggressive target. Why? Because it's what we need to do. Now, I know the big elephant in the room is the end of 2025 doable? We are not naive. We realize what this will take. It means converting 50,000 housing units from natural gas to air source or geothermal heat pumps, doing the same for 12 million square feet of commercial and industrial space, generating electricity for 100% with 100% renewable energy, not only to meet existing needs, but to power those extra heat pumps. This despite a local utility whose corporate motto seems to be business as usual. Also, grounding 70,000 vehicles with internal combustion engines, building rail and bus systems for the tens of thousands of people who commute daily to and from Ann Arbor, making the shift to local food systems, drawing down carbon with green roofs and biochar, and drastically cutting scope 3 emissions, like flying. I won't even bring up the university. All these things are necessary, but no one is talking about them because that's too uncomfortable. Instead, we keep pushing back the timeline. Now we're at a cliff. So we need a whole new approach, and that starts with new, more honest targets. Adopting 2025 will not serve to get the city off the hook, just the opposite. Ann Arborites, not just the usual suspects, will take personal action, will demand action on the part of city government. We will help mobilize them. In just a few weeks, we've collected 551 signatures of city residents in support of our new climate emergency resolution and the December 2025 target. We can get the public behind a broad effort to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions here, not by 2040 or 2050, but in the next decade. That is what is required. We have to change the terms of the conversation. Greta Thunberg said to world leaders last week, quote, "These numbers are too uncomfortable, and you are still not mature enough to tell it like it is," unquote. She was right. But I think we in this room are better than that. So we hope to see our resolution on your October 24th meeting agenda. That will give us a chance to make our case. I think we deserve it. I'm going to ask the commission to put these petitions into the record, and I'll pass them to you to take a look. Thank you.
Here, I'll take
Right
it.
here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garber. Does anybody else wish to make a public comment? Okay, there will be a second time for public comment at near the end of the meeting tonight. So the next item on the agenda is unfinished business, an update on the SWRMP process. So at the August 22nd meeting, we had a presentation by both representatives from Aptum and city staff on the SWRMP recommendations, which were, during which there were 2 resolutions that were tabled. City staff was not available to come tonight for Q&A, so we'll have to take this up, I think, at our October 24th meeting. My understanding is that staff is still working on and still drafting recommendations to submit to council, and that they will be presented to the Environmental Commission before they do come before council. So all indications right now are that this will happen at the October 24th meeting. So we'll wait until then to take this matter up again. Is there any discussion? Does anybody wish to add anything? Shannon?
I would just say, why don't you define it for the viewing audience rather than use the acronym?
Oh, yes.
So that,
I'm sorry. Yeah, this regards the solid waste strategic plan for the city for the next number of years. This will define the direction of how the city will collect trash, recycling, and compostables, and how they will measure and how they will measure diversion rates and how things will be calculated. So this has been a long issue, a long process. It's gone on for over a year so far. The city had hired a consultant, Aptum Consultants, to draft a plan which comes to 247 pages. People haven't had it on the commission. Most commissioners haven't had enough time to digest all the information here. So there was the first resolution was from city staff just to adopt the recommendations as they were, but there were some 23 recommendations. It was difficult to tell what the priority was and what direction the city would take. So these are being drafted right now, and they'll come up for our consideration again on October 24th. And
Can I share an
Yep.
update?
Yep.
So I have a 3-part update from Mr. Hubie. Staff are currently working to collect, review, and address comments from City Council regarding the master plan. Once these comments have been addressed, staff plan to come back to the Environmental Commission in October to share their proposed revisions. The city received 2 responses for restarting the MRF, which is Materials Recovery Facility. Those proposals will be reviewed, and the goal is to go to council with a recommendation by the end of October. And this is something that you all have been interested in for a long time. An offer has been made for a new solid waste manager. This person has accepted, but is still working their way through the new hire process. The hope is that they will be on board in October.
can this person be identified at this time?
I don't even know their name.
Okay, all right. Any other comments?
So just so I understand, at the October meeting, we will be asked to consider a revised version of the plan that we saw earlier that will hopefully incorporate some of our concerns?
Yep, that's my understanding. And they should be provided to the commission at least 3 days before the meeting, so that we have some time to review them. Okay. Any other? Oh, yes.
Would those then be provided by the new solid waste coordinator?
I am not sure. I'm not sure when she's going to come on board, or he or she are going to be on board. Okay, I guess we'll close discussion on that topic. So we move on to new business. Josh McDonald is going to present on the Sustainability Office's calculation of the Ann Arbor's greenhouse gas inventories. So Josh?
All right. So I just wanted to begin by thanking you all for having me here. It's been a little while since we did a update to the inventory. I think probably close to 3 years now. So we figured it was due to go ahead and do another update. So let's go ahead and get right into it. As far as the overview of what we're going to be covering, first portion is going to be looking at the data. So we'll be looking at some of the data sources, some of the limitations of the data, as well as I've included a kind of section on the scope and what scope we have, what's kind of included in this greenhouse gas emissions. Then we'll be looking at the greenhouse gas numbers. So we analyzed 2015 to 2018. We'll be going through an analysis of some of the variations that we're seeing with those numbers between 2015 and 18. And then after that, we'll be looking at some projected changes. So what kind of things do we know now that could influence our greenhouse gas emissions in the future? And finally, takeaways. So it'll be kind of wrapped up with the major points. So first section, data. So this is something I included in this version of the presentation because I think it's important to kind of get a sense of the scope. There's 3 different scopes. As you see, one's kind of city-bound scopes. So stationary fuel combustion, things like natural gas, burning in stovetops, things like furnaces. You also have inbound transportation, so all the transportation that's within the city. We also have industrial production, so we don't really have a big industrial sector, but since it is Ann Arbor, we like to think that we produce a lot of intelligent children and kids and students, so that's where we kind of include the University of Michigan in our greenhouse gas inventory. And then scope 3, which kind of includes everything that's going outside of the city. So waste that's leaving, a lot of times it's landfilled in other cities. And then some of the transmission losses. So for this time around, we actually included transmission losses, which include fugitive emissions and some other things. And then out-of-bound transportation as well. So highway travel, things like that, when people are commuting in and out of the city. And then finally, scope 2, which is electricity from the grid. So everything that we're getting from DTE. So data sources. For natural gas, I guess you can kind of break down everything we just talked about into 4 main sources. Natural gas electricity, we get a lot of that information from DTE Energy. They give us kind of a community-wide number. And then we also have numbers from the Office of Campus Sustainability, so we worked very closely with the University of Michigan. Solid waste, some of those numbers come internally from us as well as from the county. Transportation, we get SEMCOG and WATTS, which are kind of regional transportation authorities, as well as, and it doesn't come out that well, but the RIDE for kind of public transportation. So details of the data. This is kind of where we go over what's changed from the last inventory and just some of the, I guess, the nitty-gritty about the data itself. So the University of Michigan had to be disentangled from the data that we got from DTE. We worked very closely with the University of Michigan to disentangle that data, but I think it really speaks to the fact that the university and the city are, just in everyday kind of operations, there is kind of that blurring of the line. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is shared between the two institutions, the institution and the city. Another point that choice gas isn't really being captured outside of the University of Michigan. So the state of Michigan has choice natural gas, which basically means you can purchase your natural gas from someone outside of DTE. We worked with the University of Michigan to figure out how much they were purchasing, but when it comes to, for example, the commercial sector, it might be that they're purchasing natural gas, and we're not really able to capture that because there's so many options as far as natural gas in those sectors that it's not really captured by this inventory. And then finally, distribution losses and fugitive emissions. So we've included distribution losses. So every time that electricity, kind of flows, there are some efficiency losses. And then fugitive emissions from methane, so natural gas pipes and methane leaks have also been included in this inventory. So getting straight into the numbers, this kind of looks at the sector breakout. So for 2018, we have 2.16 million metric tons of CO2e. Broken out there, you see residential, commercial, industrial. So residential is about 23%, commercial industrial is 22%. University of Michigan makes up largest portion at 32%, transportation at 17%, solid waste at 3%, and then again, those production losses, so looking at fugitive emissions at around another 3%. This is what the emissions look like if we do 2000 and including 2015 and the 3 new years, so 2016, 17, 18. And you can kind of see, so we implemented some of this information that we now have from the data. We updated all the numbers throughout, so we were consistent throughout to make sure that whatever information we now have, we're kind of backtracking and making sure all the data aligns. And you can see from 2000 to 2015, 16, 17, there's a decline, and then in 2018, there's a slight uptick. So analyzing 2015 to 18, what kind of accounts for that uptick? What kind of accounts for the decline? So if we look at the stationary sector, you see residential, you kind of see a similar thing. So from 2015, 16, 17, you see a decline. 2018, you see an uptick. You see the same thing in the commercial industrial sector. There's just in case you guys were wondering about that 2000 baseline and that drop to 2015, in the 2015 inventory presentation that we did, that's a lot of it's attributed to the NCRC, so North Campus Research Center, moving from Pfizer, which was community, over to the University of Michigan. I know a lot of the energy commissioners joke that we just have to sell all of our property to the University of Michigan to meet our targets, but that accounts for that drop. And then finally, at the University of Michigan, you don't see the same kind of pattern, but that's there as well. So some of the drop can probably be attributed to DTE's fuel mix. As you see, coal makes up a large portion of DTE's fuel mix. There is a slight decrease between 2016 and 2017. Nuclear pretty much stayed the same. Renewables pretty much stayed the same. There was a slight increase in natural gas and oil as far as their fuel mix. So whatever they're using, their plants to be able to produce electricity. We also looked at population growth to see if that was attributing. It doesn't look like, I mean, there is a steady increase, but it's very minimal. So we don't think that that's really attributing much to the changes in the numbers. And then finally, the weather pattern. So this is where we took the 30-year average, and we took total degree days, which is heating degree days and cooling degree days, how much you need to heat your house or cool your house to be able to get to that 65 degrees is usually the average that's used. And we kind of see a similar pattern. You see 2015, and those percentages are all from the 30-year average. So it's 0%, then you have 3% in 2016, 2017, 6%, and then this kind of jump, about 12% between 2017 and 2018. I should point out that this is mostly for illustrative purposes. In the slide after this, we actually weather normalized it, and there's a lot more that goes into weather normalization. There's a weighted process that happens that, because if you think about it, trying to heat your house a lot of times from 10 degrees, which sometimes we reach here in Ann Arbor, is going to be a lot more energy use than trying to cool it from 90 degrees, in the hottest day. So everything's kind of weighted, and there's things that go into this. But it's just to show that there is, when we weather normalize it, you do see that it kind of levels out for that 16, 17, and 18 year greenhouse gas emissions. So we're pretty confident that that's playing a role in these greenhouse gas emissions. So this kind of gets me to kind of the larger point, which is these climate feedback loops. And there's a lot of them that we could kind of point to, but I think the one that becomes most relevant for looking at some of the changes that we're seeing in this greenhouse gas inventory are this kind of weather related feedback loop, where you get climate change that produces extreme weather. That extreme weather then makes us basically use more energy to get to kind of a place where we can cope with the extreme weather. That produces more greenhouse gas emissions, and that kind of feeds back into climate change. There's a graph here on the right, which I really like. This is actually from the UK. This summer, they actually had one of the hottest summers on record, and you can kind of see how temperature and carbon use, that's actually carbon use intensity, are kind of masking each other. So that's as the temperature continues to increase for these period of days, so does the carbon use intensity. So we kind of looked at some of the things that, looking backwards to 2018, up to 2018, what kind of things can we expect going into the future? One of the things that we're anxiously waiting for, President Schlitzel announced February 2019 that he was putting together a commission on carbon neutrality. As you can see there, the commission will be addressing a lot of different topics, but the final recommendations aren't going to come out until fall of 2020. So we didn't really have anything that we could factor into our missions, but the next update that we'll be doing with the greenhouse gas inventory will make sure to include anything that's been announced from the University of Michigan. Another thing that we can kind of factor into the future of our greenhouse gas emissions is our office's 5-year work plan. So as you see, there's different sectors there: residential sector, commercial sector, electric vehicles. Those are all programs that are targeting those different sectors. And we used similar programs elsewhere, applied it to the city of Ann Arbor, and used some proxies to be able to get estimates as far as what we could expect to see for reductions given these programs. You see about 138,000 metric tons of CO2e reduced in residential sector. Commercial is 101,000 reduced from these programs, and then the electric vehicle with the EV readiness. So if we kind of just graph that out, what you'll see is that from 2018, where we're at, there's about a 12% decrease from the base, and then you'll see about a 22% decrease by 2025. I kind of just faded out the bar just to show that it was in the future. But if you can see the residential, that's the dark blue, commercial industrial is a light blue, transportation is the gray, solid waste is that light gray, and then the University of Michigan makes the rest of it. So if the 5-year plan were to be implemented, this is what we could see as far as reductions. The other major thing that influences our emissions is the fuel mix, like we had talked about earlier. DTE recently came out with an integrated resource plan. The integrated resource plan had targets to be able to basically green their fuel mix. And those targets in 2023, 33% reduction, 2030, 50% reduction, 2040, 80% reduction. And a lot of these reductions are coming from the retirement of coal plants. So the coal plants are coming to the end of their life, and they're being replaced by other things. So by 2023, St. Clair and River Rouge are both being retired, and they're being replaced with things like natural gas, so 1,100 megawatts of natural gas, 11 megawatts of solar, 693 megawatts of wind. And you might ask why, 693 megawatts of wind versus 11 megawatts of solar. Why is the disparity? Part of it has to do with financial reasons, based off of the finances of wind. But the other part of it is that DTE is heavily relying on a volunteer green program. So they have there between 465 to 715 megawatts based off of a volunteer green program. So if you guys have ever paid a little extra to get renewable green energy, that's kind of what they're trying to target. And then 1.75% from energy efficiency. From 2040, they're retiring 2 more coal plants, but things get a little bit more speculative as far as what they're going to replace it with. So it's kind of a mix between natural gas and solar. And this graph actually summarizes it quite nicely. As you see, the coal continues to go down until 2040 when we don't see coal anymore. But in particular, you see kind of an increase in gas and a little bit of an increase in renewables from 2018 to 2024. But as soon as you get into 2030, there's this kind of question as to how much is going to be made up of natural gas, how much of it's going to be made up of renewables, and then by 2040 it becomes a very big question as to how much that makeup is to be able to make the targets. Yes?
Josh, these are great. Thank you so much for
Yes.
pulling all this data together. These
Yes.
are really great. What I'm seeing here, though, when we're being asked by Greta Thunberg and our local youth and such, or younger generations, to go to net zero by 2025, or when we even look at the county's recent resolution from September 18 about 2035 for net zero emissions, and matching it up with what DTE's doing and what you're reporting on here, it's sort of a really an emergency crisis, radical change.
Sure. Yeah, yeah, and we'll get a little bit, so there's a section at the very end that kind of summarizes everything.
Okay.
And so, okay, maybe we can talk a little bit more
Great,
about,
thank you.
kind of the bigger takeaways. Yes,
How do we, is it just we raise our hand and we can talk?
yeah, I guess.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you're doing too. I just want to point out DTE came out with another announcement today.
Oh, okay.
So they're going to go net zero by 2050.
Oh,
So I
okay.
don't know if you follow what they're doing,
Yeah,
but it's like what a lot of corporations and unfortunately not enough utilities.
yes,
But they keep ratcheting, and they're ratcheting like every year,
okay.
you know, because it's becoming more and more clear how the price point of renewable energy in particular is going to
Yeah.
go down.
Yeah.
And also how public pressure is going to go up.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting to know.
Yeah, it goes to show.
That's
how-
where we might get our hope. More for 2035 is more probably realistic, but we should be talking about it all.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it goes to show how outdated these things, how quickly they become.
Well, that was just today,
Just produced
literally
this
just
month.
today.
There will be an update. But anyway, so if we look at the impact of the DTE fuel mix, specifically, so it breaks out into electricity, which is that dark blue, natural gas, which is that kind of gray, transportation, which is a lighter blue, waste, kind of this lightish, the lightest of the blues, I think, and then the gray on top of the losses. For the most part, you know, we're looking at 2018. Again, everything that's kind of lighter is out into the future. And you kind of see this pretty significant reduction, specifically, and actually only in that dark blue. So everything was held constant outside of the electricity, because the fuel mix is only going to be really impacting the electricity side of things. And so you see that coming down until 2040, where you see natural gas and transportation still making up a very large portion of those emissions. And I guess, I mean, if we're talking about reaching net zero even sooner, that little blue part of the graph on 2040 would maybe not even be there. So kind of a summary of everything that we talked about. You know, climate change creates feedback loops. In particular, I think we're starting to see the beginnings of this kind of extreme changes in climate, and how that's making us basically use more electricity to be able to normalize our situation, you know, electricity and natural gas, and how that ultimately creates a feedback loop where you're using more greenhouse gases to be able to cope. Projected changes, so University of Michigan 2020 plans, that's something we'll be including in an update for this. The OSI plan, so that graph on the right actually includes everything that's the OSI plan, including the current DTE fuel mix. You see the targets there in red, and with the OSI plan and the fuel mix, we actually do make our target in 2025, but we miss our target significantly in 2050. And again, that's mostly made up of transportation and natural gas, if we assume that things stay constant in those two sectors. And then finally, yeah, that last takeaway, I think, summarizes it all. So, you know, how do we target these? How do we target natural gas? How do we target transportation to be able to really reduce our emissions in 2050? You know, and I think to Council Bannister's point, you know, are these targets even, I mean, should they be more aggressive? Is this something that we have to revise? And I think that's definitely a very valid question. So, yes.
How do you estimate transportation? I mean, we're going to see a disruptive electrification of, and it'll probably proceed pretty quickly here in Michigan,
Yeah.
starting next decade.
Yeah.
How do you estimate?
Yeah, so originally, we used SEMCOG and Watts to be able to get kind of regional averages. You know, I think that they would agree in saying that in some ways it's more of an art. They do kind of estimates in certain locations, and then they try to generalize it based off the region. They do bring it in both highway as well as localized. But more so to your point, you know, in the original greenhouse gas inventory that we did for 2015, I had CAFE standards in there. And it was one of those things that as soon as the federal government changed, you know, their CAFE standards and what their goals were, that portion kind of got dropped out. I think it could be something that we try to reflect in here if there's electric vehicles. If we have numbers that we're pretty certain could be coming in the near future. But it's one of those things where I wanted to make sure that whatever we were using in these predictions were things that had been kind of already announced or had already been planned. But yeah, I mean, I think that would make sense to.
Because we'll bring that number way down. And so like, if we bring that number down, let's say everything's electric,
Yeah.
and therefore renewably sourced by 2050, how would that change your,
Well, so this is the interesting thing. In large part, our office is looking at that 2050 number and trying to figure out how to electrify the last two remaining sectors, so natural gas and electric vehicles. But that actually puts more of a load on the electric side. And so this is where, if you're basically, it's a balancing act, right? I mean, you're basically putting everything that would normally be run by natural gas and even with transportation, gasoline over to what would normally be the grid. And so one of the things that we were thinking about, could you go ahead and pair electric vehicles with, for example, solar panels, for homes? Is there some way that we could market that? A lot of times we talk about the payback of solar panels, and we see the payback almost, I think it was something like 5 or 6 years when you pair an electric vehicle with solar panels. So is that something that we could do to kind of offset some of the that extra load or demand that we're going to be putting on?
and so I'm not at all saying that we want to do this by 2050,
Yeah,
but at the same time, I'm saying if DTE is 100% renewable or no carbon
Yeah.
by 2050, and we'll definitely be electric cars by then, and all mobility will be electric. And there'll be, and that's one of the incentives actually for DTE and other utilities to get into renewable energy, because they're going to make up the money lost
sure,
by not selling gas and coal-fired,
sure.
by getting more cars and trucks and buses and stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, so if we're at that point, where are we in 2050? I'm just trying to understand your numbers. If you say we're net zero for all transportation,
Uh-huh.
because I think that's pretty much a guarantee.
Yes, I think you would still have some of that come over to the grid side. I don't know how much DTE has.
There will be no gas at that point,
Right,
and there'll certainly be no coal.
right. So, but it would be going over to DTE side. I'm not sure if DTE has accounted for that as far as that load that you'd be putting on their grid.
Well, I think the commitment they made today is to be net zero, period.
Yeah,
So by 2050, I think we are, tomorrow I'll be talking, I'm on the commission at U of M.
okay,
And we'll be talking, one of the other people on the commission is from DTE.
Yeah.
And he's going to present more numbers, so I'll really understand it. But I think that they're really
So they're-
talking about zero.
yeah, so they're accounting for the extra. load
Zero
that
on the
you're putting
grid,
in.
zero transport,
Okay.
and it
Yeah.
all, and I'm just saying, it'll all be electric by then, so.
Yeah, I mean, if that's the case, then, on this graph, anything that you see that's transportation would basically, again, be gone, and then that'd probably be factored over on the electricity side. If it is renewable, if they're going net zero, then you're basically taking out,
So we just have that little itty bitty blue thing down at the bottom,
yes, basically.
which means at least net zero by 2050 is, for this city, is like really easy.
Yeah,
Sounds realistic.
So then the question is, how do we do better?
yeah. I still think, so the natural gas side, though, I mean, I think that there's still a question as far as like VRF systems, heat pumps on that side, where I think that there has to be more of a push for electrification. I know that a lot of the equipment, you had geothermal for a long time. It was a viable option at this, where we're at. But, I think the VRF technology is starting to get to the point where it can start to handle our climate. And so I'm wondering if once we reach that, where the technology is there with VRF systems, whether there's, incentive programs or something that we can do to make sure that people are electrifying and not staying on the natural gas side of things.
Yeah, and by then, the winter won't be so cold. No, I'm just
Yeah,
joking.
yeah, that's,
But, this is the biggest problem for U of M too, is we have this huge heating bill and energy consumption, and steam is our way we do it. And that whole thing has to get replaced by electricity or geothermal.
right,
And the city has to do that too.
yeah,
And that's huge amount of infrastructure. And it's not just city infrastructure, it's residential infrastructure.
yep,
How do you get all the citizens to do it? How do you get all the businesses to do it? At least at UMM, we can make a decision and do it.
yeah,
I think it's gonna be hairy,
yeah.
yeah. But I don't wanna go to monopolize
John?
things.
Can I ask a question about the fugitive emission calculation? I
Yes.
think you said it was about 3%. Was that like a calculation that you came up with, or are you applying an
Yeah.
estimate? 'Cause
So the DTE.
particularly for natural gas, that can really range
Yeah.
depending on the age of a system.
DTE actually has to report its fugitive emissions to the MPSC. So we just use the number that they reported. I mean, it could be that the number, I know there's some debate as to how best to calculate it. But, just because we
You
figured-
really said 3%?
We said, yeah, so basically based off of transportation losses and then you add in fugitive emissions from methane gas leaks. That's what they were reporting to.
Because supply chain was bigger than that.
Much bigger, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a number that could definitely go up, I guess, depending on how it's calculated.
Yeah.
And what.
And we're going through that process too.
Okay,
And we're trying to do numbers that are independent of DTE.
yeah,
And we're also very interested in what DTE says. But and I think they're, in the end, by having them on the commission, there's going to be an agreement.
yeah,
And the agreement's going to be that the PhD research team
yeah.
has probably done it right.
Okay. No, we'd love to talk more.
Yeah,
about
so
this.
we'll have some better numbers for you
I mean,
there
if you guys
too.
have better numbers, we're definitely looking to improve our.
Sorry, I didn't mean to overstep.
No, you're fine. I was also curious in relation to what you were saying about DTE. It's my understanding that they have a proposal before the MPSC right now to create another natural gas plant.
Mhm.
And if they are moving toward carbon neutrality by 2050, I'm wondering how that would shift the balance.
Yeah, so I think this graph in particular kind of shows that. I know that there was, I didn't put the exact numbers. I know that one of the options of going to natural gas plant by 2040, if you see here, there's a pretty heavy, amount that would be natural gas. And again, if there's fugitive emissions that's coming from that, and you have more natural gas plants, that
Right.
means those fugitive emissions are only going to increase exponentially.
Well, and it also means long-term infrastructure investment and.
Yeah.
it's-
So I mean,
it-
there is a lot that kind of pivots on the way the DT decides to go,
Yeah,
whether that be renewable or natural gas.
And we have the same darn problem because
oh, I know.
I don't know how many years ago, but not that long ago, someone made the decision at U of M to build a new combined cycle gas plant. And combined cycle is the magic word because we need the heat as much as we need the electricity. And they weren't ready to invest the much bigger number in doing away with the whole heating system and replacing it.
Okay.
But we're pretty sure that that plant will be, it'll be finished in '21, and it will be paid off by 8 years later. And so beyond that, it's feasible to tear it down. You can tear it down before that, too. And probably what's going to happen, our best guess now, and we haven't made a decision and nothing's final, is just that by 8 years from now, the price of renewable energy will be so much lower than gas, and we'll have storage that's affordable. It'll be like what's happening to coal now. So some of my colleagues who work in more of the finance side of things sort of use words like natural gas will be crushed by the late 20s. That doesn't help us get to 2025, but I mean, this is getting into the world of really what might happen
Yeah.
and be easy.
I've heard wind is actually kind of on par in some ways with some of the calculations.
It is now.
Yeah.
Absolutely, but we don't have the storage now.
Right.
So that's why these guys are all going to gas, is because they cannot afford to have blackouts and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
I also wondered if I could ask, on slide 10,
Yes.
I see how the shift goes from the commercial, industrial with the NCRC shift, but I don't see an increase in the University of Michigan, so I wondered what happened there.
So if you see the 2000 and 2015, there is actually a little bit of a shift upwards.
That's all,
Yeah.
that's, okay.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, and it's. I mean, there's things that kind of. It's more baked into it than. But I mean, I think.
This doesn't make a lot of people happy who are
Yeah.
complaining about too many emissions, but U of M has been growing. I mean, if you ever look at that campus, and I'm sure it was that way before I arrived 2 years ago, with cranes there everywhere, they're growing dramatically, and they're doing it without increasing the emissions because they're more fuel efficient, energy efficient buildings, and doing a lot of other small things. Because previous president, right, I think, committed the university to reducing carbon emissions by 25% by 2025. So it looks as though, we pretty much are there, with the exception that this new revelation that there are these supply chain methane gas leaks, which we were hoping to be there by 2020. And now, all of a sudden, it might take until 2025. But the point being is that Michigan has actually been trying pretty hard to at least reduce things, or at least keep the energy consumption flat, or carbon emissions flat, while growing substantially. So I think, we get this huge Pfizer facility, and someone deserves a pat on the back. we just absorbed it and didn't increase our carbon. That was great a couple of years ago. It's no longer in the good category.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a few things actually specifically on this point that we had to work with Michigan on, because I think the baseline included NCRC. So they've backtracked. I mean, they purchased it in 2010, 11, around that time frame. But they had backtracked and put it into their initial baseline.
Right.
So there are rabbit holes that.
Yeah, there are a lot of rabbit holes.
Yeah, that we could go down.
That's one thing our commission's trying to do, is make sure there are no
Okay, yeah, that's great.
fudgy
Yeah.
stuff.
Yep.
So I've heard that in terms of electrification of transportation, I mean, the biggest bang for your buck would be to put up solar panels to charge the EVs where they are during the day. So that would mean putting them up at wherever the commuters are parked.
Yeah.
At their workplace.
Yeah.
So have you checked into the possibilities of that?
Yeah, we're actually working with a couple of groups that are looking at kind of all-inclusive. You can basically charge 2 vehicles. It comes with a solar roof, so you can go ahead and do carport style. And so we're talking about that. I mean, I think, again, I think this was raised a little earlier, the holy grail is always battery storage, because it just gives you so much more flexibility. So I think that's something that they're thinking about integrating into some of these carports. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The talks are definitely happening, and even for residential. I mean, there's that question as to what do you do if you're not at home during the peak, right, when the sun is out brightest. That's areas where you really need battery storage to make sense, like if you're saying residential, right, because people aren't home until 5 or 6 o'clock. And so this is where, looking at the commercial, any kind of parking lots where we could go ahead and pair something like solar panels, I think it makes a lot of sense. Yes.
How did you categorize the Ann Arbor Public Schools? Just, it seems like there's some synergy there with when people are there, when the sun is out, big flat buildings,
Yeah.
often never shaded by trees.
Yeah.
I mean, just seems like there's a whole lot of possibility there, but I don't see an easy category for where they fit. So, and
Yeah,
they own a
that's a
lot
great
of
question.
real estate in town.
We
so-
do actually have the Ann Arbor Public Schools coming and speaking to the Energy Commission. And we would love to, I mean, I don't know if the Environmental Commission would be interested as well, but we could definitely get you guys in touch with. As far as your question, where they fit, really the residential sector is very well defined. Commercial industrial is where you're going to find things like nonprofits and even city infrastructure, things of that nature.
So where solar, I love the idea of the schools, and you see that out in Arizona, where I live, where there's a little more sun. They've really exploiting that, and the schools are getting a lot of financial savings by doing that. We're not quite at that point where it's cheap enough, given our lower sun radiation or whatever. But in terms of price points, I think you're right. Residential solar is still a good deal more expensive than gas, whereas utility scale is getting almost on parity now, and will just keep falling.
Yep.
So it would be really worth our talking about how to get a lot more charging at the place of work,
Yep.
and doing it with utility scale.
Yeah.
Every time I drive by the old landfill here, I'm like, wow, wouldn't that be neat?
Yeah.
It'll charge every car in Ann Arbor, and then probably a lot of the houses too.
Yeah.
Parking garages.
Yeah, there was actually Dave Conkle. I don't know if you guys know Dave. He was the energy coordinator, 2 past. But basically, he was working with the DDA to look at parking structures, and they had a bit of a sale effect. I think that was the major issue that they were facing. You get kind of gusts up at higher elevation. A lot of times, if you put the solar panels at a certain angle, it could actually cause the solar panel to, I guess, fly away. So that's something that they were trying to engineer, and I think they found a few different options, but it's.
You can definitely do it. You go out to Arizona, and they're everywhere. I think if you go up to that other university in Lansing, they're doing it.
Yeah.
So that's a great option.
Yeah.
And
I
then
think
people
some-
park under them, and
Yeah.
it's kind of nice.
I think
the
some of
sun
it's
damage.
also ballasting. I think there was something about creating infrastructure within the actual parking structure itself.
Maybe that's it. The
That
parking
could- yeah.
structures are too
So,
weak.
But yeah, I mean, it's things that we're definitely talking about.
Yeah,
It's
that's cool.
Exciting. Cool. Thank you so
Okay.
much. Is there anything else? Yes.
I like these sectors that you've broken out here. Now, do you as we go forward, are you gonna break out anything for like conservation of trees and their carbon sequestration? And then breaking down residential into like lifestyle issues, like one of our, Mr. Garber mentioned the scope 3 flying.
That's a great
and
question, yeah.
Vegetarian diets, and then my last one about this question about, we used to think that tall high rises made out of concrete and steel densely in the core was gonna be the secret. But now we're saying, heat island effect, and concrete is a horrible greenhouse gas emitter to create. So
Yes.
some of those, that menu, how
Yeah.
might that fit into the inventory?
It's a great question. Yeah, so we tried to stick with the GPC. They have kind of a protocol that they use for municipalities, in part because it's easy to get the data, or at least easier to get the data. And a lot of times, even though we have to go through a very long process to clean the data and make sure that it's accurate, a lot of times it can be harder the further away you get from those kind of protocols. With that said, I think that it's something that we're exploring. I think especially from the life cycle, it's harder to think, if you're talking about purchasing a life cycle of an item, it's harder to think how we would get at what's being purchased in the city, just because it's such it's kind of, you're trying to get a lot of data, and there's probably privacy issues, and there's a lot of things that you kind of have to contend with. With that said, we are thinking about, are there ways to kind of expand what we have now to maybe include other things, like maybe, like you were saying, trees, or I know another one that I can't remember what city had attempted, somewhere out in the West Coast, of course, but looking at aviation. So planes flying overhead and trying to capture something like that. So it's something we are exploring, but it becomes a lot more difficult when you don't have, those kind of, the kind of data that falls into these categories. Yes?
Okay. I had a question on slide 18 about the electric vehicles. The first part is that the city fleet, or is that everything?
Oh, that's community. So one of the things that we looked at when we looked at transportation, it is, I think SEMCOG and Watts would say it is a bit more of an art, but we looked at both including community, so transportation within the city, but because we have such a large commuting population that goes in and out of the city, we also included highway miles beyond a certain border to make sure that we were capturing some of that transportation in and out of the city. So we attempted to, but that number in particular, the EV readiness, that's referring to community-wide.
And how do you know how many electric vehicles there are?
So we do some calculations based off of other places that have done similar programs and try to get estimates that way.
And then just one last part to that.
Yes.
How do you balance that with the fact that the fuel mix is primarily coal?
You're talking about with electric vehicles? Yes. So that's a great point. A lot of times people see electric vehicles as a great alternative, but as it stands now with the fuel mix that we have, it's going to be some time before it starts becoming greener than, for example, the alternative diesel. With that said, I think as time goes on and DT comes out with these announcements, which seems like almost every day now, it's great because then we can start saying, okay, at a certain point, there's going to be a break even. And I think actually, as of right now, it's pretty close to parity, but there'll definitely be, in the coming years, a break even where hooking up to the grid is going to be a lot greener. So it's one of those questions of, can we start the ball rolling now and make sure that that's being adopted? Yes?
Thank you.
You got to stop me.
No.
Someone else.
First.
Oh, yeah, and you can go.
Josh, I was just thinking about the question of parity between the grid for EVs and coal generation and use of gas. My understanding is that pretty much most places in the US, it's already cleaner to use EVs, given current fuel mixes.
Yeah, DT's a little...
Especially here, though.
DT's a little different. I mean, we ran some calculations to see the parity based off the fuel mix. I think we're starting to get to that point where getting an electric vehicle does make more sense from just even the clean side as far as the grid compared to... But again, I mean, it's one of those things where it's just a matter of time that it's going to become significantly, I mean, it won't even be a question. It's going to be significantly greener.
You mentioned this choice gas thing, which I never knew about. Is there a
Yes.
choice electricity thing?
There is, but it is a very small pool. So I think we have all of 10 accounts that are Choice Electric. And there's a very long wait list. It was something that was created by the MPSC and has been shrinking ever since, in part because large utilities generally like to have more customers. And so there is a Choice Electric, but it's it's almost insignificant.
If we were to, say, bond a large utility-scale solar somewhere on our land, U of M, Ann Arbor, and generate our own power, is there anything to stop us from doing that? And the way we would do it is we would hire a company to do it so they'd get the tax credit since neither of us pay taxes.
Yeah, well, we should talk about this
Is
offline.
that doable?
Because there are things that are in the works we're talking about now, but
Okay.
yeah, we'll talk offline about it. All right. Anything? Yes.
I thought of another thing that perhaps Commissioner Gibrando might want to elaborate, that we've been learning at council about work of the Planning Commission. And a couple things that they have been talking about lately is, as we're bringing on or looking at how to zone the new recreational marijuana facilities and whatnot,
Yep.
it was recommended that, because they're going to be consuming a lot of electricity,
Yes.
apparently,
Yep.
that the magic number was determined to be 10% of their energy use may need to come from solar.
Yes, I'm very familiar with that percentage.
This is just growing it in our city limits?
I believe it's growing.
I can
Yeah.
elaborate a little bit.
Please.
Yes, please, yeah.
So with the new legislation that happened last year, we're putting together kind of a package of how to be able to deal with the fact that it's moving from medical to recreational. And many communities are opting out of being part of that system. And so it's, for a smaller community, it doesn't have official planning staff, it's cumbersome to come up with all the regulations and things like that, and Ann Arbor has really been leading the way and has been very on top of it, and so a lot of the smaller rural communities are saying no, we don't want to deal with it, and Ann Arbor is saying yes, and we're coming up with rules and ordinances and regulations around how to handle it. So as part of that, the people that are the growers, which is basically an indoor endeavor at this point, have an enormous footprint in terms of their energy use. It was very sobering to look at all the statistics for that. And at the beginning, we were thinking, cover the whole thing with solar will really knock out a big chunk of their energy use, and it's like they can cover the entire thing with solar, and it's going to be a fraction of their energy use. So the growers are really only allowed in the manufacturing districts, which we don't have a ton of, but often big, open, flat-roofed kinds of situations, which seems like a real potential to be able to develop solar. They're not in skinny little high-rises with the tiny roof on top, they're in other areas. And we don't have a whole lot of manufacturing here, but we may get more as this happens, because it's been very successful, I'll just put it that way, in terms of, it's a market that's growing rapidly, and not everybody wants to deal with it, so people are coming here. And so we, at this point, have more, and we don't have a lot of growing facilities right now. It's been more medical marijuana dispensaries, but that's all changing in terms of the mix of all that is happening, and we're hoping to be able to require this 10%. Another thing that I would really like to do is to, and I don't know whether our code allows us to mandate this or not, is that to mandate where they get their energy from in terms of some of the green currents programs and
Yes.
things like that, so that they have to be getting, if they can't cover it all with what they're generating, that the energy that they're buying has to be of whatever the most rigorous possibility is for buying into a system that has renewables as a big part of the portfolio. So I don't know what we can actually do with that in terms of legally, and, there's a lot of things to explore with that, but right now I know for sure we're moving forward with the 10% is what's on the table. It hasn't been approved yet by all the different governing bodies, but it's really in the works, because there's a lot of deadlines that are coming up that we need to be able to kind of get over and through, and So that's what's happening right now with that. I was going to talk about it during the Planning Commission update anyway, so here's my chance to be able to talk about that. So it's exciting that we're mandating this solar thing. I think that that's really cool because they are, they're able to do it. They've been, a lot of people are trying to jump on this for a reason. It's a very lucrative business. And so it seems like a kind of an alignment of the stars in some ways to be able to ask these people that are getting in on it to be able to have to reduce their energy footprint at the same time. So that's where things stand right now.
Yeah.
I bet anything that the city can prevent growers from being in the city, just as we could prevent
Right.
retail. So we have the upper hand, I suspect, to ask them to, if they want to be able to grow in the city, they got to source all their energy renewably. And I'm almost sure the DTE will do that. It has the capacity to do that with their wind.
To make it 100%.
100%.
Wouldn't
Because
that be
otherwise,
awesome?
we're just going to,
Oh, I know.
it's going to be a battle we have to fight later.
Yeah, and the bar is going to change a lot on these graphs.
And we have the upper hand
if
now.
Exactly. And so I think that's the idea, but there are a lot of filters we have to get through to make sure that we can actually mandate something like that through our code. Whether it's
Right.
legal for us to do that. That's what I would like to do, because if they can, I think we still want the solar piece of it, because I think it's important in a lot of other ways too, in terms of what people are doing, and it's just the perfect physical setup to mandate that, because they're kind of pole barn type situations, that are big and wide and open. And so that just seems like, it's not a leafy neighborhood where you're dealing with trees and, all those kinds of
It'll be
things that can
cool.
inhibit it.
Ann
Yeah.
Arbor will be on the cover of Green Times.
There you go.
Green in more than way.
Right,
more than one
exactly.
way.
And it's not like nobody else is doing in the state, but there are many communities that are opting out because it's cumbersome and you have to figure out how you're gonna deal with it, and it takes staff time. Josh has been involved in it. I mean, it's a big thing to enter into. So, I think Ann Arbor's been a real leader with developing ordinances and regulations around this, and Josh and many other staff have been working really diligently on this to try to move this through really quickly. This has been like lightning speed compared to other ordinances, because we're coming up on deadlines in which we need to decide whether we're opting in or opting out of the state regulatory system around some of these.
And you're
So-
consulting with Colorado towns and things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Out
yeah.
there, I mean, I spent a lot of time there. You don't see growers in cities. I'm sure they're in Denver and places where you just
They're in
impact.
they're in the industrial areas.
But not in these smaller towns.
No, right, but
Yeah.
they're utterly transforming the industrial districts of Denver
Yeah.
and changing the economics of it big time. It's making what I learned at a different conference is that they're just making other manufacturing and industrial very difficult because they're raising the rent on everything in these areas that were pretty reasonable before.
Yeah, they can afford it.
Exactly.
Let's make them pay for it.
So it's tricky business. It's a
Yeah.
lot of change really fast, and I can just say that, that this city has been very diligent about looking at other examples in other places and learning from the mistakes of other places to try to integrate those things into our code here.
Yeah, and I can also say, I was looking a little bit at the energy use too, which was,
Sobering.
it was
Holy cow.
sobering is a good
I
word.
know.
And one of the great things, I think this is kind of something that even the fuel mix could benefit. DTE. A lot of times those green purchasing programs are driven by demand.
Yeah, right.
And so if you have these very high energy intensive areas, these kind of industries that are demanding this green power, I can only see what that would do as far as driving DTE to continue to kind of build out these green purchasing. So I think it's in more than one way. I think it'd be really great.
Yeah, that gives a positive feedback to DTE too.
Exactly,
Because it might speed up
Yeah.
the lowering of wind energy costs in the state.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for the other communities that are opting in, I think Ann Arbor's been very forward-thinking about a lot of these things, and because we're developing the code, it makes it easier for other places that are opting in to say, oh, well, let's look at what they're doing, let's copy what they're doing. And I think that that's a real opportunity for us as well, to be able to influence other communities that are opting in, because we're not the only ones. I just know a lot are opting out too, so.
I wonder if it's a marketing thing for them too. I mean,
Totally.
you
I
walk
think
into
that you're
the,
Right,
in the head shop
Yeah,
and you
right.
buy,
right,
you know, it's better than organic.
right, there you
Yeah.
go.
Thank you so much, guys.
Okay, any other-
Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Josh.
This is a lot more fun than I thought it'd be.
So the next item on the agenda is ethics presentation by Kelly Beatty.
Oops, I spoke too soon.
Great, hello, thank you all for having us here. My name is Kelly Beatty, I work in the city clerk's office. I have a rather unique job in city government, and that is trying to encourage compliance with state and local legislation and policies and procedures for boards and commissions. Now, I don't do this by myself. There's around 20 different staff liaisons that do a lot of the legwork for this, including Emily with you here today, Josh, who just presented, and Chris, who's going to be joining me up here in just a moment, who works with the Local Officers Compensation Commission. Now, I wanted to just put a big high-level view of how many boards and commissions we have and sort of what their role is in city government to start us out here today. You hear a lot of different numbers at how many commissions exist. I've heard numbers in the 80s, the 90s. I'm here to tell you none of that's true. Looked at this number, made sure to count it, counted it twice. We have 61 different groups in the city that the city council appoints members to. Now that is a high number for a city our size. But if you start to pull away some of these groups, such as the internal council committees, so the council rules committee, the council administration committee, or outside agencies that the city council appoints members to, like the Huron River Watershed Council, we're actually down to only about 35 groups. Now, to staff all of these positions on all of these different groups, we keep track of 410 different seats. But again, once you start to peel away things like the council committee assignments or staff assignments to some of these different boards and commissions, such as the city clerk's role on the election commission, we're down to only about 278 appointments. Every year, a large number of these appointments expire. Some of your appointments will expire next year. Some of your appointments expired a few months after you were first appointed, such as Commissioner Overpeck here. But next year, we're looking at 75 terms that are going to expire throughout the entire city. These are staggered appointments, so no full board will ever expire at the same time. The Environmental Commission, you have 3-year terms, but some other groups, such as the LDFA, have 4-year terms. The Building Authority have 5-year terms. So the 75 number is never consistent throughout the city. Now, we do also have about 30 vacant seats on boards and commissions. So there's a lot of work to do with filling all these roles with people just like yourselves throughout the city. Now, that means we have to start this process pretty early. Terms expire May 31st, but we're really looking at January for a start time. So if any of your terms expire next year, you're going to get a notification in January to start to consider if you would like to reapply or if you're thinking of taking your time on the commission, appreciating what you had here, and quietly exiting. Now, if you are hoping to be reappointed, we're really looking to start to get applications for that at the start of March. You will get an automated email from our roster tracking software. It looks a little suspicious when you get it, so it's okay to be a little bit nervous. But if you ask Emily to check and make sure it's on the up and up, I'm sure she'd be willing to help you out with that. Now, we are looking at the end of March, March 31st, to get any applications from anyone that is hoping to be reappointed, or from anyone else in the community that's hoping to be appointed to fill any of those vacancies. Now, our appointments are due at the start of May, the first council meeting in May of 2020, so that is May 4th. We do need a couple weeks lead time, and that is why that March 31st deadline's in place. As city council packets get put together, it's a tremendous volume of information. I know you absorbed a lot from Josh's presentation a few minutes ago and with many of your other presentations throughout the year, but our city council packets exceed 27,000 pages per year. So when you start to break that down, even into 3 meetings a month, you're looking at over 700 pages of documents that go into each meeting. So again, please try to have these in by March 31st if you're hoping to be reappointed. Now, our application process is totally online now, so anyone that does apply, or any of you that happen to reapply, will have their information shared with all members of the city council who do have a login to look at your information. So although the council members serving on this commission nominate members to the Environmental Commission, the entire city council will have a chance to look at those. So maybe if they don't know you so well, they can get to know you through your application and ask some good questions. Now, that's one of the most fun, exciting parts of my job, is dealing with this application process. But one of the other fun parts is dealing with the scheduling for all of your commission meetings. Now, I said that we have 61 different groups that meet, and that means that we have a lot of meetings here in the city. In 2018, there were 455 meetings of boards, commissions, and committees. Now, you didn't make a large contribution to that, but you certainly contributed. This year in 2019, we've had 343 meetings already, with 139 meetings to go before the end of the calendar year, which means we're going up by about 30 meetings this year to 482. So that's a lot of meetings. If you start to break that down by how many work days are available, when people can meet, it's about 2 meetings a day. So I tell you this because in a moment, Chris Frost is going to go over your bylaws with you, talk about some provisions for how to call a special meeting. Asking you to please be nice to Emily. She's going to be the one that's booking meeting spaces for you. So realizing that you're sharing resources with a lot of other groups, hosting a lot of other meetings. So although your bylaws may give you an 18-hour notice to call a special meeting, realize that in practice, it's going to be really hard to find a place to meet and schedule something like a CTN coverage for that in that amount of time. Now, I did just want to wrap up here with my portion of this presentation with a good note. So last year was the first year that we had a boards and commissions thank you event in many, many years. It's actually at the behest of Commissioner Mirsky. We had a resolution from many years ago that had fallen off the table. No one had been paying much attention to it. But we're going to bring that back again next year. And we're going to take it out of January. So we had very unfortunate weather. Some of you are nodding because you made it through the blizzard to make it to that. So lesson learned, we apologize for this year. Next year's going to be in warm weather in spring. So right now I'm going to bring Chris Frost up. He's going to dazzle you with some information about the Michigan Freedom of Information Act, the Michigan Open Meetings Act, and your very own bylaws. So everyone, Chris Frost.
Can we ask some questions? Or
Yes.
go ahead, Councilmember.
Absolutely.
Well, I had a question. That was great, Kelly, thanks.
You're welcome.
On the system where we keep all the applications, that Granicus
Yes.
thing, have we ever considered making that, doing away with that and having it just like a PDF, that more folks could, more transparency on the actual applications and all? One of the reasons I ask is that council members, you know, you were mentioning what we have to read, almost 800 pages if we wanted to get ready for any one meeting. And having to find your login to Granicus to go in and read people's resumes, it would just be a lot more efficient if they were in the email when we're saying so-and-so's being nominated instead of just their name, if more folks, if it was easier.
Sure, it feels easier to do it that way. We can certainly look into that, looking at a good way to do that and share the information better. I'd like to just have a further conversation with you, walk through some of the software and find a good way to do it.
And there may be privacy concerns for the applicant.
Correct.
But if there isn't too much of that, there would be ways to streamline it so that more of us could see that more easily.
Yeah, I'm all for transparency and finding better ways to have access to the information that's there. So we can certainly look at better ways to do that.
Thanks for the great job.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Couple of questions. You mentioned the reappointment process and how
Yes.
that starts, and helpful to get that going soon. There was some discussion in council, I think, about limiting the number of terms for commission members. Has that moved forward at all?
I haven't seen any ordinance amendments with that.
Okay.
There are some groups that are affected by a charter provision for term limits.
Okay. We had also voted a couple of months ago to add a youth member, and I was wondering where that is? Oh, okay.
Yep.
And then thank you, sorry for the questions. The last one was, do you do any type of onboarding process?
So
'Cause I know when I started, I got nothing. And-
Yep,
And it's
so-
a lot to kind of swim through.
we started 2 years ago, just with a orientation program that starts after the May 31st appointments, again, where the bulk of our appointments have happened. So last year, in fact, Commissioner Overpeck attended this, so yes, we have started that. We've also added a training manual on the city clerk's website that I'm sure Emily can get you the link to.
Okay. I don't know if you might want to go back, because maybe I wasn't the only one that was missed in that
Okay.
type of process in terms of a recent appointment.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Well, did you have a question?
I'm sorry I'm so talkative tonight, but I wanted to build on what, or ask a follow-up question on the recognition event at Michigan Theater.
Yes.
And I remember when John Mirsky found that old thing, and we found out that the theater actually would allow us, as part of our contract with them, to have up to 10 such meetings a year. And to my knowledge, we only had the one in January. And so I know you just said all the 455 meetings and all, but has there been any thought of using the theater more often for more recognition events for volunteers?
I know there's been some discussion about that through the city administrator's office. The assistant city administrator would be the best person to answer those questions.
Thank you.
And I can also just chime in that we are actually hoping to use the theater in November for a climate screening. So we're trying to, staff knows about this and is trying to, take advantage.
Okay, thanks.
All right, thank you.
So now we're going to get to the real inspirational portion of the meeting, which is administration and procedures. I'm Chris Frost. I'm in the attorney's office. I advise boards and commissions in the city, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the legal structures that you all operate within and the procedures. This is information that I had developed for some new commissions that had started up, and we're starting to go back through existing commissions to, again, try to get people up to speed who may not have had this information before. So I'm going to talk about Open Meetings Act issues and records retention, and also go through some of the salient parts of the bylaws. And certainly you can ask questions at any time. So boards and commissions in the city operate under the Open Meetings Act provisions, which basically means that all meetings are open to the public can come and speak, and there's public notice of it. So what this means practically for you all is that the communication you have outside of these public meetings is circumscribed in a specific way. And basically what it means is you cannot have a quorum of this body discussing, deliberating, or coming to a decision on an issue outside of a public meeting. And some of you might say, well, gee, that sounds like an inefficient way to get things done, and it is. It's not designed for efficiency. Still, that doesn't mean that you can't get things done outside of a meeting. Most boards and commissions, when they have things, it's too hard to get all you need to get done during a meeting. So most boards and commissions, when they have things that need to be done, they will have assign a couple or three members to kind of go out and do the research, develop a recommendation or something like that, and bring it back to the body for consideration. And that's fine. That smaller group, that sub-quorum, can communicate as much as they want about things. And then it comes back to the commission, and then it's fully discussed. So that way the public has access to that deliberative process. It's just something that is sort of, people aren't used to. Most people are used to coming from an environment where they work with maximum collaboration, so everybody's copied on everything. There's a lot of email traffic going back and forth. So you just need to be very careful that you do not copy a quorum of the body when you're communicating about things. Also, when it comes to email, emails you generate about your business here are city records, and therefore they need to be retained. So the simplest way to do that is to copy your staff liaison on all emails that you send, and that way she will have a record of it, and you don't have to worry about tracking it yourself. If you do not do that, then you will be responsible for maintaining those communications and producing them if requested. If we, for example, get a Freedom of Information Act request for those communications, we would ask you to produce them. It doesn't happen that often, but it does happen. And so I would recommend that you keep them in a location that they can be easily accessed and searched. And again, there are a lot of nuances to this, let me just say that. And so if you have a question about it, please feel free to contact me in my office, and we can advise you on that, because I know it gets a little sticky when you actually get down to nuts and bolts in different factual situations. So we are available to help with that. Any questions about that?
Yeah, so just to make sure I got it right, if we are emailing amongst all of us, or even a subset that's bigger than a quorum, as long as we don't make decisions on those emails, we're fine.
I would recommend that you not do it, just to avoid the possibility, because it's very easy for an email chain to change from simply sharing information to a discussion. And not everyone even
So
has
we got to keep away from all discussions.
Yeah, if you want to communicate something to the entire group, the best way to do it is to send it to your staff liaison and ask her to provide the information to the group, and that way it can be provided without sort of degenerating the back and forth discussion.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions on that?
What about like a rolling email, where it might have started with just 4 or 5 commissioners, and then a month later, someone found it and sent it to 2 new commissioners?
Yep, still a problem. Yep. So that's why it's important to keep, these communications to as small a group as possible, only what you need, and you just have to be vigilant and always be thinking, I don't want a quorum of the body to hear this, because then that can do, even if the people are not participating, if they're just copied on it in the discussion, it can still be a problem. There is case law that has found that is a violation as well.
We don't want that kind of controversy.
Yeah.
And a big fine, I think,
Yeah.
could be a big
No,
fine.
they only find the chair of the commission.
Yeah, that'd be my responsibility.
It's
And
best
the members
avoided.
of council.
It's best avoided, let's just say. All right, so if there's no more questions on that, I'll move to the bylaws, which, if you all look at your screen, should be there. So just going through them, a lot of this is standard terms that apply to all boards and commissions. Article 3 here provides your specific purposes, objectives, and duties, and that's taken from the ordinance that created you. Some commissions are created by resolution, some by ordinance. This is an ordinance-created body, so that is taken almost verbatim from there. One issue we encounter sometimes is commissions want to sometimes go beyond what their purposes are authorized by council, or more commonly, their role may have changed as the commissions are created at a certain time period, years go by, the purview changes. Climate change was probably not the major issue people were thinking about when, say, the Energy Commission or even this body was created. Now it's a much more important aspect. If you feel like the body needs to be in a different area or have different powers or duties or scope, that's something to recommend to council. You can do it through a resolution. And I believe some commissions have already done that. And I can't remember if this commission did, but just like when you were asking council to add a youth commissioner members, it's the same process for changing your purpose.
Can I,
Yeah.
I know that we have changed this clause 2 that we're looking at on the screen a couple of times. The Leslie Science Center Advisory Board doesn't exist.
Yes.
So this doesn't seem like it's the most current version of our bylaws.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think this is the most current version, and that may be just residual in the ordinance itself. So that may be something that city council might look at removing from the ordinance. Like I
Maybe we
said.
can go back through email, because I know that we've changed this.
Okay. Yeah, this is the last version I found, and I mean, I know that these bylaws are still going to need to be changed, particularly when the youth commissioner comes through. So there may be some things in here that are not current.
Okay,
But overall, this is going to be the general template, so I'm kind of using it just as
great.
the general purposes here. So then the next section that tends to cause confusion is Article 5, which is ethics and conflicts of interest. So I'm just going to kind of go through these briefly and talk about kind of what they mean. The main purpose of this section is to promote public confidence in the body, and primarily that's to avoid conflicts or perceived conflicts of interest, or at least to daylight them so that people are aware of them. So Section 1 provides that general guidance, which is that a member shall abstain from discussion if there's a conflict or a apparent conflict, and that the important thing here is that it's a case-by-case evaluation. Every conflict is different. I've never encountered one that's exactly the same. The ones that are easy are easy. It's you say you own a property and the commission's making a recommendation on, buying it or some kind of financial benefit. That's an easy one. And then there's gray area all the way from there. So again, this is an area that if you have a question about it, if you think there might be a conflict, feel free to contact us and we can advise on it. Section 5.2, again, is fairly straightforward. Don't take bribes. Section 5.3 is kind of an extension of that, which is don't put yourself in a position where you're going to benefit from something. So don't take maybe a financial position in a company or something that's going to come before the commission at a future time. Section 5.4 talks about disclosure. So if something like this comes up, again, you can feel free to call us, but the general practice is to disclose it to the commission. So you say, hey, I work for such and such a company, they are related to this decision we're making in this way, I think it's a conflict, I'd like to be recused, or I don't think it's a conflict, but I wanted to disclose it to the body. And usually that's a relatively straightforward thing. If there gets to be a concern about it or a dispute or debate, it can move to the commission to take a vote as to whether that person should be recused or not. And that is section 5.6. Section 5.7 is another section that often gets overlooked, and this is to complete an annual disclosure of affiliations. It doesn't have to be everything you're affiliated with, but things that might bear on your role as an environmental commissioner. If you belong to environmental organizations, nonprofits, professional organizations, anything that might could conceivably present a conflict. And again, it's just really to sort of get you thinking about possible conflicts. And to preempt the question on that, we don't have a form for it, but it really just can be a bullet point list. It doesn't have to be anything complicated. And you can provide that to your staff liaison. Section 5.8 is also one that comes up relatively frequently. Being on the commission connotes a certain authority. And we want to be very careful that when you speak, and you all have jobs where you probably interact or speak as an expert in your area, probably related to environmental matters, you want to make sure that you make it clear that you're speaking on your own behalf, unless the commission has adopted a formal resolution or you've got some other authority from the commission to represent them. And it's fine to say, I'm a member of the Environmental Commission, but then you want to follow that up with saying, I'm speaking on my own behalf here.
I'm not sure if this is addressing this completely, but
Yeah.
I have been told, there have been times when we have been approached by press because they have questions about things that are before city council. And I've been told in those situations that we should be considered as city officials. How does that relate to this clause?
I'm not sure what context that would be in, so perhaps this is a discussion we need to have more thoroughly offline.
It's almost always with solid waste issues,
Yeah, okay.
in my experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I would need more information. I wouldn't want to give you an answer right here that
Okay.
doesn't have the full information, so,
Okay.
but we can talk about that for sure.
Okay.
Section 5.9 is sort of related to that. it doesn't apply so much to this body, but for bodies that make decisions regularly on properties or, decisions that have binding effect. But it could also be implicated here, which is not to speak on behalf of a petitioner or be a petitioner before the commission. So say, for example, there was a solid waste contract or policy that the commission was weighing in on, and you wanted to stand up and say, I want to speak on behalf of, this company that's going to possibly provide a service. That's something you want to avoid because you don't want to have that influence or appearance of influence on the other commissioners when you're actually going to be voting. Yeah.
Oh, I just had a question about what's the definition of a petitioner?
Yeah, and that's sort of a term of art. Basically, it would be anybody who's going to be subject to a decision of the commission. In your case, it's likely going to be a recommendation or a recommended set of policies. So if, say, you were saying, we recommend that X company have this contract or something like that, that would be somebody who, I guess, would fall under the term petitioner in this. And perhaps that's a good point that word maybe should be modified so that it's more broadly applicable. In a zoning context, for example, you have somebody applying for something that's more clear. But here it really means anybody who's subject to a decision that may positively or negatively affect them. Section 510 is, and again, a lot of these provisions are written in response to problems that have arisen in the past. So this is just to remind commissioners that the city has an administrative staff and that the commission is an advisory body, and that it's best to keep your communications going through that staff person so that they are aware of everything that's going on. They are your channel to the city. They have the knowledge of where to send inquiries if you have them, and they are responsible for complying with city policies and practices. So talk to them if you have a question about anything. It just makes everything easier when it's one point of contact. And then section 11, the last one, again, it's always in response to a problem. Be nice to people. Be understanding, have differences of opinion civilly. You are representing the city here, and I know opinions can be strong and arguments can get heated, and you're dealing with important issues. But we just want to remind everybody that it's a place for civil discourse and civil disagreement. Any questions on the ethics section before I move on?
I have one, and I just can't remember, but because I do so many of these things, it seems, but disclosure, you automatically will ask us every year, there'll be a form or something that we'll do our disclosures on.
Yeah, like I said, there's no form, but an email list or whatever.
But you'll solicit it.
Well, that would come from the staff liaison. Yeah.
I will do that now,
Yeah.
that I know that it's a thing.
Because I actually didn't realize if I did it before, which I don't think I did, it's like, so I'm a member of the Sierra Club, I got to disclose that,
Yep.
that kind of thing,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a process. We're always working to improve the processes and get everything kind of in order, and Kelly's been a great help with that. So going forward, we hope that this will all be much more regular. Most of the rest of this is sort of self-explanatory, talking about the officers, the meetings. Kelly mentioned special meetings. You can call them if you need to. More notice is better. Everyone has busy schedules. Getting a quorum can be difficult. So just bear that in mind if you want to go that route. Moving down to the committees section. This is also an area that is a source of a lot of confusion sometimes. Committees of the city, of city bodies, when you create them, they're also subject to the Open Meetings Act. So they have to schedule meetings, find a room, have times, notice, all of that sort of thing. I would submit to you that not every issue warrants creating a committee. As I said before, 2 or 3 people in a work group can often do the work just as well. Committees should be reserved for things that require a lot of public input or deliberation, and even then, those committees are coming back to the full body to make a recommendation. If you're doing research, researching the texts, the literature on something and bringing back a report, probably don't need a committee for that. You can have that public engagement at the full meeting when you bring that back. So just bear in mind that committees do entail a lot of administrative overhead, and to use them sparingly when they're warranted. Committees can include non-members as well, so if you need some expertise from outside the commission, you can do that as well. And of course, you're always welcome to work with people not on the commission if you've got one of those work group assignments that you need some additional help lifting on.
I'm sorry, can I ask for clarification?
Yeah.
Can it be appointed by the chair and approved by the commission? I was told we had to go through city council. Is that not the case?
That is not the case, no.
Great.
And again, section 9.3, if you look at it, it's good if you do create a committee to give them a charter, give them a purpose, give them a deliverable, and so that when that's done, that they are done, because otherwise you can have this sort of spawning of committees that kind of go on perpetually, and it's not an efficient way to do business for the most part. So it's always a good idea to give them a good, direct, clear purpose. Moving on down to the Parliamentary Authority, which I'm going to touch on a little bit more detail, but Robert's Rules is kind of the old standard that everyone uses. It's a terrible, terrible book for bodies like this. It's designed for meetings of large societies in the 19th century, and it's that thick, and it doesn't need to be. Parliamentary procedure should be pretty simple for a body like this. It should be for efficiency. Get to your topic, have the discussion, and then take your vote, make your recommendation. And so the bylaws reference Robert's Rules as a guide. If you come into a thorny problem, you can refer to it. I don't really recommend it. If you have a question about that, feel free to give us a call. We've dealt with Robert's Rules more than we would care to admit. But it shouldn't, parliamentary procedure should be something that promotes efficiency, not something that hamstrings a commission. And that's pretty much it. Like I say, the rest of it should be pretty self-explanatory. If you do have any questions after this that you think of, feel free to contact me. I'm happy to provide guidance on that.
I do have
Yeah.
one other question. I was looking, I don't know which document it was. I was looking through it earlier today, and there was something in one of these documents that said that we should consider having a separate email address for the commission.
Yes, it's a very good question. Thank you for bringing it up. Generally, if there is a FOIA request, Freedom of Information Act request for emails, the email address that you use will be disclosed. So if you have a private email address that you want to keep private, I would suggest creating one specifically for your commission business. That also may be an easy way to separate those emails if you need to track them down later to produce them. So,
Would it be possible to have the city create email addresses for us?
it is possible. It is, again, a fairly, there is some administrative overhead to that. So it has traditionally not been given out to most commission members. Also, there are certain IT policies. Once you have that email address, you're in the city system that you would have to sign a understanding of. So that's not my decision to make. If you want to inquire about that, I would send it through your staff liaison, and she can route it to the proper person. But yeah, historically, that has not been done. Yeah.
Susan, just let me know if you do want one.
Okay.
If we just copy our staff liaison on anything we do, though, is that kind of sufficient, basically?
Yeah, then you wouldn't need
Because
to
I'm never
retain.
going to check like 18 email accounts
Yeah.
for each,
Right.
you know what I'm saying? It's just
Yeah,
not
then you
gonna
wouldn't
happen.
need to retain it because Emily will have a copy.
Yeah.
Just a question, if I happen to delete something from the commission, it's still in record format somewhere, right?
You should talk to IT about that. They do keep backups of most things, yeah,
Okay.
for a period of time. Yeah.
I guess I hadn't fully internalized that commissioners would be subject to FOIA also. And so that means theoretically that if they're emailing anyone about environmental issues, some private citizen could submit to you a FOIA request for everything that said commissioner said to random other private citizens retroactively for a year or two, like council experiences.
Well, it would have to be related to the commission business. So, like I say, I'm sure everybody here emails about environmental things all the time. If it's not related to the commission business, it wouldn't be a city record then.
Now, in council work, though, it was not related to business functions of the city. Some of our FOIA requests have been related to citizens. What did this council member say to that citizen, irregardless of content?
Yeah, I mean, the question of whether it's related to city business is, again, sort of a case-by-case thing. So it would have to be, you'd have to look at the individual emails to determine that.
Well, and, okay, so just to, yes, if it's all sort of case by case, that's sort of a gray area then, where commissioners, this is the problem with this whole area, is that it puts a chilling effect potentially on people's desire to communicate in email if it's done on a case-by-case basis, whether their email would be subject to public scrutiny.
Yeah, and again, the open meetings laws, the FOIA laws are not designed for maximum efficiency of the people involved. They're designed for public disclosure, and so we kind of have to take them as they are and live with them, so.
So just as a hypothetical, say a person had been on a commission for about 10 years and hadn't heard this rule before. I have no idea how much email I've sent over the last many, many, many years.
Yeah, and we can certainly have that conversation if you would
Okay.
like, when we have the conversation about the other.
So when we
as well.
onboard,
Yes,
we should definitely tell people this. 'cause
yes, and again,
this is
that's
the first time I've heard it.
what we're trying to do here is, yeah, go back and pick up the pieces we may have left.
And they do now onboard, so I've gone through all of this once.
That's excellent.
But I've also gone through FOIAs as a climate scientist before. And I think the best rule of thumb, I think is most important for us, any email you send, imagine it on the front page of the newspaper. Okay? And if you feel like that wouldn't look good, don't send it. Yeah?
Any other questions on the bylaws? So the last piece is this brief guide to parliamentary procedure. And for chairs and vice chairs, I recommend looking at it and certainly in some detail. And if you have questions to ask me, for the rest of you, you can take a quick run through. It's just kind of reiterates what I said before, which is that parliamentary procedure is for efficiency and promoting the effective action of the board. It's not for dickering over points of order and that sort of thing. So this guide has attached a shortened version of rules of order called Rosenberg's, which are consistent generally with Robert's rules. They're much shorter. I think they're even too long for a body like this. And there's a description in there of kind of what I think you can look at and what you can ignore as well. So that's something you can peruse at your leisure. And again, if you have any questions, you can contact me.
Okay, Chris?
Yes.
I did not go through such an onboarding process, so I just want to make sure that these 4 documents here represent the onboarding training process that you're currently using.
So Kelly also referenced the website we have, which has a more complete guide.
Okay.
This is the guidance that I provide. That other guide will give you much more information about all of the other workings of the boards and commissions in the city. So you should get
Okay.
that link too from Emily.
I was trying to
So
find it.
that, and Kelly can tell you where that is as well.
Okay, thanks.
Could I get that too, Emily?
Yeah, I'll send it to
Oh, she'll
Phyllis.
Thank you.
send it to everybody.
I will.
Okay, well,
Any other questions?
all right, well, thanks, Chris.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll turn to reports from committees, other commissions, council, and chair. So let's start with the planning commission. Is there anything else you'd like to add? Okay.
Yeah, not really. We had a canceled meeting, and some of the other things we reviewed were more kind of right downtown, didn't have as much impact. So I'd say it was
Okay.
the marijuana piece that was the biggest.
Okay. And our Energy Commission liaison is John Mursky. He's not here now. So I don't know if there's anybody else here who would have anything to say about that. No? Okay. So, and the water, let's see, the Parks Advisory Commission. I think, Mike, do you have anything, an update?
Yeah, in the last meeting, we voted to replace the gates on the Gettys Dam. They were severely worn. But now that these are classified by the city as recreational dams, all of this expense falls to parks to be able to maintain.
Yeah.
So that was going to be a $1.1 million project that went up to a $1.2 million project to repair instead of replace these 60-year-old steel gates. We also had, what is it called? The Parks Fairness Fund. So when the city budget increases by a certain percentage, the Parks administrative budget also must increase by a certain percentage, or by that same percentage. So that gave Parks $389,000 to be able to allocate. The interesting thing that I'll mention that has to do with sort of environmental stuff is the $100,000 that we voted to allocate toward the skate park lighting, which we had a first reading on, but for the second reading, we wanted to encourage that $100,000 to go towards some sort of sustainability improvements with that lighting, whether it be dark sky lighting, some sort of solar offset that would go with that lighting. So to really try to use this feature that Ann Arbor is becoming nationally known for, the skate park, as something that can also highlight our sustainability ethos, if you will. So, yeah, that's what I get out of the notes of our last meeting.
Okay, all right, thanks, Mike. So let's move on to the subcommittees. The Natural Features Subcommittee.
Could I actually interrupt? Could I
Go ahead.
ask you to expand on something?
Yeah.
With the skate park, are you all thinking about doing solar there as a way to generate power for the lighting out there? Is that like the main thing that you're thinking about, or is that?
I mean, that's what we kicked around,
So,
but
can I-
that will come up again, so we
I
could we could call out solar as what we would want to spend that money on, and
One thing I would love to see there is that you have a gravel parking lot as part of that serves that skate park, which is really dirty runoff when that stuff comes out of there filled with sediment. If you had solar, like carport kind of idea there, you could capture it, because it's super clean if it comes off of solar panels, and then feed it into the stormwater system that you already have there with all the different rain gardens and things like that. It would just be great to not have to deal with all the sediment coming off of that parking lot. So it could be a win-win between energy and stormwater. So just something to put out there.
thanks.
Okay, then the Natural Features Subcommittee. I guess, Chris, yeah.
Yes, we have been working hard. I see one of our members, Rita Mitchell, is with us today. We are meeting tomorrow from 12 to 2 here in City Hall. We are really taking a real close look at conservation of our existing natural features, including our heritage trees. We've been looking at ordinances from Tiffany, our forester. I'm not going to try to pronounce Garabowski's. She's came from Novi, so she had a good ordinance there that she shared with the committee. We also got another good ordinance from Rochester, Michigan. So we are synthesizing these and working on an improved, more protection for our heritage trees and more conservation of them. And we're, looking at things like phytoremediation, where the trees will absorb pollution from the ground for us, in addition to sequestration in the air and all the good things they do for the stormwater. And then also we're concerned about the birds. I think we all heard that the bird species have declined, I think 30%. And so our birds and our chimney swifts are coming to our trees, and if our trees aren't here, we're contributing to that problem with the birds. So, again, we're meeting tomorrow, and again for another 2-hour meeting, and we are making progress. And I think that's everything, unless on that Natural Features Committee, that's our main focus right now, is trees.
Okay. All right, thanks, Ann. Any questions or comments? Okay. So,
I'd just like to chime in. One thing that I think is kind of sorely lacking from Natural Features right now is the notion of connectivity between various natural areas. We've got 160 parks in town, and we have less. The Natural Features ordinance that we have is really geared toward preservation of existing natural or open spaces. And I am not sure that that necessarily reflects the reality of our city as it moves forward. A lot of places are already developed. We have a natural features ordinance that specifies what not to do in wetlands. This natural features ordinance doesn't necessarily talk about how we take some of the fragmented landscape that we've got and look at the future for how that's better pieced together. I'll be coming to the meeting tomorrow, and I'd like to try to help us think about this, because I think it's something that this committee is particularly well suited to do, since there are people in parks on this committee and also people in planning on this committee, and it's a bigger issue than just natural features. But when natural features was first brought up as a committee here of the Environmental Commission, it was to review this over 15-year-old master plan that we have now for the city that still is not yet updated. So we've had a lot of conversations about big trees, we've had a lot of conversations about pesticides. We haven't necessarily had a lot of talk about the sort of connectivity that might be able to make all of our natural systems more resilient for the future. So I look forward to speaking about that more as we move forward.
Fabulous.
okay. Yeah, we'll be having our discussion about areas of emphasis for next year pretty soon, so we'll keep that in mind. So the Solid Waste Subcommittee has not met since our last meeting, but we will by next meeting. So Water Subcommittee? Sorry. Yeah. Okay. There's no report there. So Council?
I've already sort of interspersed it in what we've been working on. We've been working on all of these topics, from solid waste to the solar power at our most recent working session. To trees, to the emergency plan. And tonight's meeting has been helpful with regards to whether the city council, to what degree we can mirror what the county did for net zero emissions. And then just one other question or comment, that from the Planning Commission, there will be next Tuesday night a public hearing about a possible new zoning called T1 for transit. So that would focus on density and pedestrians and non-motorized vehicles. And there's also a couple more Greenbelt meetings coming up on September 30 and October 3rd. And I think, unless another commissioner can help me out here, I think that was, am am I missing anything that, significant related to the environment that the council has met on since we last met?
I can't think of anything. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thanks, Ann. So, the chair, I just have a few things. I want to mention that one of the attachments you got was a process for city commission involvement in the selection of a firm responding to an RFP. Now, this has come up in connection with the MRF restart. So the MRF, as you know, there was an RFP issued some time ago, a few months ago. Let's see, the number is, let's see, it's RFP 19-28, so this RFP can be found, it's publicly posted. I think it's still up there, it was about a month ago. And so the city has graciously invited a member of the commission to go attend the evaluation of the proposals. So in this attachment here that's come with the minutes on city commissions _RFP evaluation draft, CAS, indicates the rules that the city staff would like whoever the volunteers from the commission to follow. So let's see, I will be on vacation starting tomorrow morning, so I'm hoping that some member of the commission will volunteer to help city staff review the proposals for the MRF. The meeting is scheduled for next Tuesday, October 1st, from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So it's a large time commitment. So, I mean, Commissioner Mursky is another person who's familiar with these issues, and he is on vacation, but I think he may be back, but I have not heard from him since I'm notifying him of this opportunity today. So if anybody would like to volunteer, please raise their hand. Otherwise, we'll wait and see what Commissioner Mursky has to say. Okay.
We all work.
Okay. And then I only had one other thing to mention, and that is that, you know, as you know, the city's composting is contracted through We Care Organics. They have their composting facility is off Platte Road, on the road from Platte Road to the transfer station and the MRF. And they're doing tours. So if anybody's interested in doing a tour of the composting facility, it's very entertaining. And Don Butinsky is the manager there, and and the tours are scheduled for October 9th and November 6th. October 9th and November 6th at noon, around noon. So if you'd like to attend, please call Mr. Butinsky at 734-489-4518, or you can email him at dbutinsky, that's spelled DBUTYNSKI, at wecareorganics.com. So I'd just like to make that announcement. So that's all I owe. Mike?
One other announcement has to do with a stream stabilization project at Huron Hills Golf Course. There'll be a public meeting on that on October 1st at the Huron Hills Clubhouse from 6 to 7 p.m. But there's a project to take what is essentially a ditch and turn it into a lovely little stream with all sorts of stormwater improvements on Huron Hills Golf Course. So I just wanted to,
Yeah. Well, that's
spirit
good.
of mentioning public meetings.
Mm-hmm. Are there any other announcements anybody would like to make? Okay. So move on to the report from staff.
Great. I have a pretty short report today. Exciting news is that we're moving forward with the solar on the firehouse volunteer installation. It's looking at October 17th and 18th. If it's open to UM students, it's open to anybody in the community who would like to get up on a flat top roof and help actually install solar for our first firehouse that's going to get solar. So if you're interested, feel free to get a hold of Josh, who was here earlier, or me, and we can get you with the right people. Other exciting news is that OSI, the Office of Sustainability and Innovations, had a new permanent staff member start. His name is Galen Hardy. He's a community organizer from Detroit, and we are thrilled to have him. His role is community engagement. So he wasn't able to make it tonight, but he's going to come to a future meeting and introduce himself. We're working hard on Earth Day events. It's the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, so we're really trying to have a week of celebration. So please do let us know if there are any Earth Day events that you are part of that you would like to collaborate with us. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Emily. Is there a date established now for the solar panel installation?
Yeah, October 17th and 18th,
Okay.
and it's Fire Station 6.
Down on Eisenhower Road?
I believe so.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. So items for the next agenda. We've already heard about
Yes,
the,
we've heard about the climate emergency.
the climate emergency.
And I am open, if we have time, to just further look into that if other commissioners are willing to do that. I know we just covered a lot of it tonight, but if there's more to cover, I think we might be able to find more to cover.
Yeah, I think certainly we could discuss it for 5 or 10 minutes now.
Could you distribute the resolution? I've seen an earlier one. I'm not sure if it's the same one that they were talking about tonight.
I haven't seen one.
I have not seen their draft either.
Okay.
What they sent to us was the Washtenaw County draft.
Okay.
From September 18.
Okay. And so what were they collecting signatures on, the 551?
What's the petition language?
If you'd like me to read it, it's relatively
Yeah.
short.
Mm-hmm.
Resolution endorsing the declaration of a climate emergency to restore a safe climate. We, citizens of Ann Arbor, are calling on the mayor and city council to pass a citywide resolution declaring a climate emergency. Resolved that Ann Arbor declares that we face an existential climate emergency that threatens our city, region, state, nation, civilization, the natural world, and humanity. Resolved that Ann Arbor officially commits to leading an emergency mobilization effort that, with appropriate financial and regulatory assistance from state and federal authorities, end citywide net greenhouse gas emissions by or before December 31st, 2025, and immediately initiates an effort to safely draw down carbon from the atmosphere. Resolved that Ann Arbor commits to educating our citizens about the climate emergency and the broader ecological crisis and working tirelessly to catalyze a climate emergency mobilization at the local, state, national, and global levels to protect our citizens as well as all the people and species of the world. Resolved that Ann Arbor commits to a stable source of adequate funding to support climate action at the local level and to the sharing of lessons learned with peers from around the nation and world.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Does anybody have any comments about this before I weigh in? No?
You're not
So-
going to be able to discuss it in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean, it's got there are a lot of implications.
Mhm. Yeah, there are, certainly. It's pretty broad.
Big.
And personally, I mean, I think that, I appreciate the sentiment, and I think many of us share that. But I think short of having like actionable goals and a plan and some kind of cost attached to it so that people know what they're committing to, I think it's going to be difficult. I'm not sure exactly what a climate emergency would do coming from the Environmental Commission, or what the council would be able to do about it.
I'm also not sure how effective it is to ask city council to pass another toothless resolution that doesn't actually accomplish something specific with funding attached with accountability.
Yeah.
That's my concern.
I mean, there's a history of this.
Yes.
And so I think, and so I'm not saying that it's not useful to do this, but I think that it's better to reserve the energy and the passion for actually generating the information that's required and the kind of pathways that are available to get there, and what kind of sacrifices we might be asking for the city, not just for the city budget, but the city residents as well. You know, we have examples in the town here. Matt Grokoff has retrofitted a 1910 built house to be carbon neutral. And so I think the means are here, but I think we need to think about how we would present this to the citizens of the town. I'm not, you know, that's my opinion.
How do you handle, we have, so there's staff who can do things. But one of the things you could do is, you're absolutely right about the resolution that we were given is, it would take quite a bit of work to determine feasibility or alternative paths of action. You know, timeline 2025 is, you know, I think it's just totally impossible for this city unless everyone in the city turns to bank robbery or something. But there might be a way we can do something better than what we have now. I don't know. I think it would be in the interest of Ann Arbor to be more in sync with University of Michigan, because, you know, we're doing a very deliberate and careful analysis of what's feasible and getting a timeline. But there is also the aspirational part of declaring a climate emergency, and I haven't looked into it myself, and I wonder if we could or should. There are all these communities across the planet that have declared climate emergencies, and it might be, in a way, good for us to be in solidarity and aspirational in some way as a step, and just at least declaring our, yeah, we really understand what you're saying, and something has to be done, and then we have to not commit to 2025 perhaps, because that, we just don't know if that's feasible, and we certainly don't know where the money is to do that. But we could commit to a process. Now, University of Michigan tried that. The president, we convinced him to go for carbon neutrality, and he said yes, which in my book, compared to where I've been in before in academia, was like, wow, you know, like we're the biggest university in the country, and it's going to be the hardest for our university, and he committed. But he gets unrelenting blowback from the students, because all he did was commit, and there is no timeline, there are no specifics, but he has this commission working on that. So we might want to beware falling into that same trap, where we say we declare a climate emergency and we have this process, and council, you know, doubles down, and the citizens say, what the hell's going on here? You know, it's just a bait and switch, or it's, you know, where's the accountability?
We know that trap. We've been in that trap a lot.
Okay.
We spent a lot of time in there.
So I don't know what you do. You've been in it a lot. Maybe you have,
Well, we've passed lots of resolutions, and city council has as well, but there's no ultimate consequence or no goal or nothing that's achieved by it.
Yeah.
We just haven't funded things. We don't have programs to implement them.
well, it costs so much money.
It does.
And what's happening with renewable energy is the costs are going down, 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 down. And so at some point in the future, probably after 2025, it is literally going to be cheaper to be on renewable energy than fossil fuels. And everybody will switch. But to do it now and be done by 2025 means we spend a whole lot of money that if we do it 5 years later, we don't have to spend. Now, I know firsthand that there are a lot of climate implications of waiting 5 years. So I just don't know what we do as a commission.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, it might be worth reaching out to the people who are circulating this petition and seeing if there's some way that we can collaborate with them to come with something that we would feel comfortable supporting and that we do find useful. I would not support that right now, just because I feel like we've passed so many things, and if we're going to have any authority at all, we need to pass things that we stand behind, and we haven't been doing that. We being a city, not necessarily this body.
Yeah. Does anybody else have an opinion they want to voice about this, or? Okay.
Could we do something like, or just think about it, like what we're doing at U of M is we're asking students and faculty and staff to give us ideas, solutions, and not just like, pie in the sky stuff, but like with real numbers behind it, and real research behind it. And then we're also contracting, we did an RFP, and we're going to hire a company to give us alternative estimates on how to reduce our energy. So we're looking at it from multiple angles. So it's like a really sincere and comprehensive analysis that will be a lot more texture than what we heard from Josh. And it should allow us within a year, and I don't know when it'll be, but hopefully soon, we'll be able to sit back and say, okay, what's our timeline going to be? And it'll be a timeline that we really, that'll be matched with resources, or at least will be realistic with respect to real resources, and we'll get it done. So that's somewhere closer to what they want,
Yeah,
and probably what we all want,
yeah.
which is, it's so hard to take maybe it might be really hard to take their resolution, because we know there's no accountability. But what we're doing is we're taking their passion, and we're trying to work with them to come up with something that will work, And the neat thing is that at least U of M, with 30% of our emissions, will have something in a year. But I'm going to guess, and I can't really say, I can't speak for my fellow university commissioners, but I'm going to guess it's going to be closer to what the IPCC has suggested, which is 50% by 2030, and all the way by not 2050, which is what IPCC said, but maybe 2040, 2030, 2040. I don't know what it'll be. My own guess, and I think a lot of us who are in the business think by 2040 it'll be totally done, no matter what we do.
Yeah.
But we gotta, be cheap.
Well, I would be very interested in reaching out to this group, just to tell them, Emily and Missy and Josh worked very hard on coming up with proposals that city council has approved and that we need to execute and implement. Net zero affordable housing, all of the programs that were on there, they're not done yet. We can still use people's energy and enthusiasm and passion to get those done and to help us do those things. So I think we may be partway there to maybe some kind of compromise that is also really effective and useful.
Yeah, they gotta be real things,
Yeah,
and they gotta be really serious things.
yes. We have
Right.
really talented staff who has put in the work and thought about what programs are doable, how much they would cost, where there would be money to do them. And that seems to me to be the sensible place to put our efforts.
Yeah, and the university's brought a lot of resources to bear on this, I
We're
believe.
spending a lot of money on this.
So the question is, how can the city staff and the commissions and council provide enough time and talent to do the similar kind of analysis for the city?
And there are some things that we really need to do together. Transportation, and think of all our students living in all the houses. So there are a lot of us who feel like we got to figure that out, which is really hard, but maybe we can do it more easily together.
Well, I would love to have 551 people come to city council and say, you said that you were going to implement these, so let's do it. If we had that sort of resident voice, that would be very effective, and that would be very welcome.
And once U of M teams have all done their thing, a lot of those people are citizens here.
Sure.
We'll have a lot of resources in terms of ideas.
That's a lot. They've been standing at the farmer's market for weeks. I know they're out there trying to engage with people, and that's an opportunity for engagement that would be really effective.
Yeah, I agree.
And then is there a way we can somehow have, you already have a resolution for a climate emergency.
Well,
but
they have one.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah.
Meaning council has one?
What the petitioners just.
No.
Okay,
this
but maybe we need, something that says, we're gonna up our game, we really,
Sure.
and it's not just us, it's like the council
Yeah,
and the
that's it.
mayor. I think that would help a lot. And it might help galvanize the whole city. And, just by stating this, there are a number of cities doing this in Michigan and in the nation. It also helps propel us forward as a human civilization or something.
Okay.
Take that to the
So
bank.
I just have one last thing to say, and that is that, I mean, people talk about spending money to reduce their greenhouse gas emissions, but an idea that was floated in 1974 by Amory Lovins and Stuart Brand was voluntary poverty. I mean, how many people turn their thermostat down to 62 in the winter? Or up to 78 in the summer? How many people just don't, you know, when they have to get in, when they're getting into their car, how many people just say, is this trip really necessary? Can I ride my bike? Can I walk? Can I bundle my errands together to minimize the amount of travel? So there's a lot of that can be done as well, but it's hard to say how to promote those kind of behaviors.
But and if you're in California and you're in an Ann Arbor, you know, a municipality in California, it's a lot easier, or a university, it's a lot easier to do this stuff because the state's doing it. And the same would be true if the federal government was, you know, all in. So part of what we're doing is, if we are serious, is we're trying to make this a priority for everyone, not only in their individual actions at home, but in the officials they elect.
Okay, well, I look forward to talking about this at the next meeting. So are there any other items for the next agenda?
Should we ask the staff for anything? I mean, I honestly don't know how we work. But Missy has lots of ideas and things.
Well, Josh just
And
presented
Josh,
a
of course.
plan for a budget that they have, a 5-year plan
Yeah, we
and a
definitely
budget
can share that with you.
that he talks about how much reduction they're anticipating in greenhouse gas emissions based on the programs that they've designed.
And that's what
already.
he showed us today.
Yeah, there's that
Projections
one
are based on
slide. Yeah,
Yeah.
just that
There's a
one
much more
slide.
detailed plan.
But there's a more detailed plan behind it.
I'll find it and email it out to the commissioners.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That would be
okay.
great.
That would be great. Yeah. Okay, any other items for the next agenda?
Well, our big item will also be the food gatherers meeting and the discussion of food waste and methane gas and ways that we might be able to assist this food gatherers more as a group and as a city with the good work that they do. Because even though they collect and redistribute all this food, they even themselves have like a third or a quarter waste ultimately. So we'll learn more about that on the 24th also.
Okay. And then we have the SWRMP update. Okay? All right, public commentary. We come up to the second opportunity for public commentary. Is there anybody who would like to come?
I'm
Hey,
Rita
Rita.
Mitchell, and I wanted to say I'm encouraged by the discussion I heard just now, and the ideas that I heard that kind of bring together issues relating to the climate. For example, the talk about solar panels and the skate park seems like a good idea. And I hope that all future budget items for the city have a component that addresses the climate impact for each item, so that it's in application, and that it also provides opportunities for people in the community to participate as well, in community solar, community geothermal, things that need to be integrated into projects that are big public service projects that I hope that you'll be able to direct. And I also want to say, as someone who's been a part of the community and part of the university for a while, I hope that the plans for the university are including not only the central campus and the north campus, but the medical campus and the athletic campus, which also have great opportunities for improvements in their use of power. I was at Mary Sue Coleman's presentation when she started the sustainability issues, and the focus at that time was on the general central campus and excluded athletic and medical from all of the activities. So I hope that you can.
It includes everything, including Flint and Dearborn.
Super.
And I don't think we'll have a concrete plan for Flint and Dearborn by the end of the end of the time, other than to say, here's the process. It's just my guess. because it's just a gigantic job, and you got to involve people from those two campuses, and we're only talking to them now for the first time. But it'll, certainly on our campus, it'll be everything. It'll be medical, it'll be athletics.
Okay, that's reassuring.
Yeah, the president was very clear that it
Yeah.
should be everything.
Okay.
And, you know, when you start thinking about it, you're like, wow, can we really?
Yeah. Well, one other thing, though, I guess, and that is when we talk about the use of the types of fuel and the future where I saw the trend line with coal dropping, that's really good. But if natural gas is considered, you know, something that's going to expand, I have a real concern with that because of the methane involved. And I know that you know the risks of methane, so
You know, we have to get out of gas really soon.
we have to, yeah.
And we will, I think. But not by 2020.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
All right, thanks. Anybody else? Okay. So, do we have a motion to adjourn? Do we have a second? All who say, all who, aye?
Aye.
Okay. All right, thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, Peck, I had an idea, but I didn't want to say it on